Well, it's a little hard to compete with the first beautiful spring day, but thank you all for being here. So I'm Paul Brest and co-teacher of this class with Debra Satz, who happens to be one of our discussants today. Because a number of you may be new to the class, I thought I would summarize the introduction that we made last week just to explain our goals for the course. Disagreement is inevitable in a democratic society. Even people who are well motivated and conscientious will answer questions about major policy issues in different ways, perhaps because of their different life experiences, because the facts are hard to pin down, because they'll make different trade-offs among competing values. Disagreements only become a concern when particular positions are taken to be immune from evidence and critical scrutiny, when loud voices drown out dissenting views, when minds are closed, when humility is seen as a vice, and when a culture of incivility prevails with respect to those with whom one disagrees. And I should note, by incivility, we're not talking about politeness, but rather the failure to treat other people as deserving of our respect simply because they hold different views on matters that we think are important. This kind of illiberalness is especially a concern in a university. The fundamental mission of the university, the pursuit of knowledge, absolutely depends on the free exchange of ideas and openness to questioning received opinions. It's because we feel this mission is under stress from forces both outside and inside the university that Debra Satz and I have decided to teach this class. Each of our 10 classes addresses a contemporary issue of policy about which people hold strong differing views. Each class has two goals: to illuminate those issues and to do so by modeling critical, empirically informed, respectful discourse. We recognize that engaging in respectful conversation is only one mode of bringing one's case to one's fellows. Protests and organizing are also legitimate modes of discourse. But they are subject to time, place, and manner restrictions. For anyone who feels motivated to protest particular speakers, there's a free speech zone outside the classroom for doing so. Inside the classroom, students and visitors will have a chance to ask questions and make comments, and we'll provide as much room as possible for your participation. Before I introduce today's speaker, if you're a student enrolled in the course, could you please scan the QR code and fill out the Google form for attendance. And now to our discussants. Al Roth is the Craig and Susan McCaw Professor of Economics at Stanford. He's made significant contributions to the fields of game theory, market design, and experimental economics, and is known for his emphasis on applying economic theory to solutions to real-world problems. Among the markets he's designed or redesigned are the National Resident Matching Program, through which most doctors become residents at American hospitals, school matching programs, and kidney exchanges in the US, which help incompatible patient donors find life-saving compatible kidneys for transplantation, and of course we'll be talking about that today. He shared the 2012 Nobel Prize in Economics for the theory of stable allocations and the practice of market design. Debra Satz is a philosopher and the Vernon R. and Elizabeth Anderson Dean for the Humanities and Sciences, as well as the Marta Sutton Weeks Professor of Ethics and Society. Her research focuses on the ethical limits of markets, the place of equality in a just society, theories of rational choice, feminist philosophy, and ethics in education. In 2004, Dean Satz received the Walter Gores Award, Stanford's highest teaching award. She co-founded Hope House Scholars Program, which pairs volunteer faculty with undergraduates to teach liberal arts courses to residents of drug and alcohol treatment facility for women. Among her books is Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale, The Moral Limits of Markets, from which one of today's assignments is taken. If Dean Satz looks more relaxed this week than last, it's because her task as a member of the search committee for Stanford's next president was completed before the first and second. We imagine that the speakers will converse for about 50 minutes. The floor will then be open for questions or comments from the audience. We'll also survey the audience at the beginning and end of each class to see whether arguments moved minds. That said, even when minds are not moved, we hope the class will give you an appreciation for the reasoning behind the views that you reject. And now, do we have the poll up there? Yes, so here is the question for the poll, and Graham, who is our TA for the day, will guide you.
Okay, I'm showing results in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so it looks like I might be preaching to the choir today. But one of the pleasures of preparing for this debate was to reread a chapter of Debra's book, which I read years ago before we first met at a conference in Finland, a conference of mostly non-economists. And, reading the book, and you've read the chapter now too, I'm struck by her compassion and her humility, right? She's not as sure as most medical ethicists are of what she thinks. And I've also written a book, and where she's a pessimist, I'm an optimist. My book is about market design, and I tend to think that often we can solve problems that markets have by designing them well, and we'll talk a little about that. But both of our books have something in common, which is that we notice that different markets are different from one another. There's no one-size-fits-all for how markets should work. And so when we think about markets, we have to think about their special properties. And when we think about kidneys, in the United States, we are subject to the 1984 National Organ Transplant Act, which says it's unlawful for any person to receive or otherwise transfer any human organ for valuable consideration for human transplantation. And that phrase, valuable consideration, is a slightly complicated legal phrase, but for sure it means we can't buy and sell kidneys in the United States. It also means we can't make contracts on them. So let me tell you why it's an issue, because given that we can't... So the story about kidneys is kidney failure is one of the top 10 causes of death in the United States. During COVID, it was briefly number 11, but it's back to number 10. And 135,000 new cases of kidney failure happen each year in the US, but we only do about a little more than 25,000 transplants. And people who don't get transplanted, if they have kidney failure, have to go on dialysis. And the life expectancy of someone on dialysis is 5 years, and dialysis isn't a lot of fun. So what that means is, of the 135,000 people who get kidney failure each year, about 110,000 of them aren't going to get a transplant, and eventually they're going to die on dialysis. Now, not all of them would be eligible for transplant. Some of them have metastatic cancers that prevent them from getting the immunosuppressive drugs you need to deal with the transplant, but a lot of them could get transplants. And the main issue is the shortage of organs, not finances, because in the United States we actually have uniquely national insurance for kidneys, because Medicare covers kidney care, both dialysis and transplants. So your kidneys are Canadian. They have national health insurance, even though the rest of you doesn't. And it's not that we can't afford transplants, because transplants are much cheaper than dialysis, and Medicare cheerfully pays for dialysis. So it would save money if we had more transplants. And of course, when you have scarcity, you also have inequity. And so here's a graph that is organized by education. Phil Hells, who's here, prepared this graph. What you see is people who, adults, American adults who have less than a high school degree are 3 times as likely as other members of the population to get kidney disease, and only conditional on getting kidney failure, they're only half as likely to get a transplant, whereas people who have college degrees are only half as likely to get kidney disease, and conditional on getting it are twice as likely to get a transplant. So it's not quite clear what's going on there, but you could think of it as income. And there are lots of other ways to talk about the inequities that come from scarcity. If there were plenty of kidneys, we wouldn't have to worry so much about equity. Okay, so one way to get some insight into the story about kidneys and payment is to think about blood plasma, which has some of the same issues, even though it's a different body part. And a lot of our thoughts on blood plasma around the world, a lot of the laws around the world, are inspired by a 1970 book by Richard Titmuss, a British sociologist. And he compared, using mostly American studies, he compared the frequency of hepatitis in the blood supply in Britain, where only non-compensated blood donation was allowed, and the US, where compensated blood donation was allowed. And he found there was more hepatitis in the American blood supply from paid donors than there was in Britain from unpaid donors. And he further worried that if we kept paying donors, we would crowd out the supply. We might not get more blood, we might get less blood, because people who would have given blood if it were considered a virtuous thing to do would maybe not care to give blood if we were paying for it. So he had other things on his mind. He wasn't a big fan of markets in general, so he wrote that he's concluded that the commercialization of blood and donor relationships represses the expression of altruism, erodes the sense of community, lowers scientific standards, limits both personal and professional freedoms, sanctions the making of profits in hospitals and clinical laboratories, and legalizes hostility between doctor and patient, and many more things. It was a long final paragraph of his book. So he was generally suspicious of markets, but was in particular suspicious of paid markets for blood. And in 1970, his book got quite a good reception. Some famous economists wrote pretty favorable reviews at the time. But the very next year, a test was developed for hepatitis in the blood supply. And since then, there hasn't been hepatitis in the American blood supply. Okay? And a lot of other things happened. In the 1980s, AIDS ran through the blood supply around the world before HIV was detected as the organism, both the paid and the unpaid blood supply. But since 1985, the American blood supply has been very safe. And it would have surprised Titmuss, who didn't live to see it, but I say 1998, but I think the right date is 1996, Britain suspended domestic plasma collection and decided instead to buy all its plasma from the US. We're the Saudi Arabia of plasma because we pay for plasma here. So we export tens of billions of dollars of plasma and plasma products around the world. And no country that doesn't pay domestic donors for plasma is self-sufficient in plasma. Right? So the US supplies approximately 70% of the world plasma. Okay? And here's a graph that suggests that payments don't crowd out plasma, because indeed the United States and Austria and Czechia, Czech Republic, and Hungary all pay for plasma, and Germany. So those are countries that have a lot of plasma donations per 1,000 population, and no one else does. And I have a paper coming out in the British Medical Journal because the EU, the European Union Parliament, has just passed a resolution against paying for plasma because they think it will make them more self-sufficient in plasma. Presently, they buy a lot of their plasma from the US, and they worry about this. But if you look at the next graph, what you'll see is there's a column that says by country in the EU whether they allow monetary payments. And the only ones that produce 100% of their own plasma, the only ones that are self-sufficient, are Austria, Czechia, Germany, Hungary, and Latvia, all of which pay for plasma. And none of the other EU countries are self-sufficient in plasma. But if you think it's immoral to pay people for plasma, you don't have to, because you can always buy it from the US. And so it's a very funny moral conundrum that we're seeing. But let me suggest that the plasma story suggests that payments don't crowd out supply, right? As with so many other things, payments sometimes increase supply, right? So the story about kidneys, of course, is we allow living donation. I think I maybe should have said that when I talked about kidneys. We get 21,000 kidneys from deceased donors and over 6,000 from living donors each year. Healthy people have 2 kidneys and can remain healthy with 1. So if someone you love has kidney failure, you might be able to save their life by giving them a kidney, right? And so we allow kidneys to be freely donated, but we insist that the price of kidneys is 0. It has to be a gift. So we can't increase the supply by increasing the price. And that's a little bit what we're talking about today. Maybe it would be a good idea to start experimenting with doing that. Okay? And Frank McCormick, who's actually also sitting here, has done a lot of computations on this. And basically he estimates if there were just 40,000 kidney failure patients who could have had transplants who don't, taxpayers would save about $7 billion a year if we could get kidneys for them by paying $77,000 a year. I think I have that figure up there somewhere. So the reason is dialysis is much more expensive than transplantation. Okay, so a transplant costs less than 2 years of dialysis. And after dialysis, you need more dialysis, whereas a transplant is something close to a cure. You need immunosuppressive drugs afterward. So not only is transplantation the best treatment for kidney disease, it's also the cheapest. Okay? Now, even economists recognize some limitations for the use of money. So here's a New Yorker cartoon. Most people can pick out the economist in this picture. Right? Here's this guy who has come to dinner, and he says, we didn't have time to pick up a bottle of wine, but this is what we would have spent, and he's offering his host some money. Now, we all understand why that's funny, because when you invite me to dinner at your house, that's a gesture of friendship, and I can return the friendship in lots of ways. I could come with an expensive bottle of wine. That would be just fine. I could invite you to dinner at our house sometime. You know, you should really come to dinner at our house sometime. If I'm in a strange town, I could say, can I take you out to dinner? You'll have to choose the restaurant, but I'll be the host. That comes pretty close to paying you something. But that would all be fine. What isn't fine is for me to try to pay you for the dinner because you're not a restaurant, right? When I pay my bill at a restaurant, I've extinguished my debt to the cook. I don't have to invite him to our house for dinner. But you invited me to dinner at your house, that's an offer of friendship. And I have to show that I understand that, and that when I accepted the dinner, I'm prepared to be your friend and to reciprocate. So the quality of friendship might be harmed by monetizing it. And that's one of the things that we sometimes hear about why we shouldn't allow payment for kidney donors, because it would harm the quality of altruism. But we're not trying to primarily promote altruism here. We're trying to save the lives of kidney patients who are going to die. So the issues of concern in various ways, and Debra speaks about them in somewhat different language, but some of them are similar. One of them is we shouldn't do things that objectify or commodify people, treat them as ends rather than means. And I have some sympathy with that, but not to the point of not wanting blood plasma to be available in hospitals. Blood plasma and its various components are commodities. The World Health Organization lists them as essential commodities. If you want to open a hospital anywhere in the world, you need plasma products. But the World Health Organization insists you should get those from unpaid donors. Coercion. You know, sometimes we worry that high payments to disadvantaged donors, to poor donors, will be coercive. And that's something to worry about. We had a student here not long ago, an economics PhD student, who came and talked to Debra about this and did some experiments where he would try to harm people by paying them too much, with some limited success. But normally, we think there's something unethical about paying people too little. That's why we have minimum wage laws. We think there's something unethical about getting goods and services from people and not paying them enough for it, particularly if they're poor. And then lastly, there's the slippery slope argument that maybe payments to donors are okay by themselves in isolation, but they might open the door to a less sympathetic society than we would like to have. And that's the argument that I have the most sympathy with, and that as a market designer, I think that if we're going to try to do experiments on compensating donors, we should think ahead about this and try to address. Okay, so just to propose to you a particular experiment that's now being proposed by an organization called the Coalition to Modify the National Organ Transplant Act. They're proposing legislation that would have a 10-year pilot study to give tax credits over 5 years, $10,000 a year, to living kidney donors who give kidneys to strangers, non-directed donors. These are special people. They're not talking now about paying every kidney donor. They're talking about paying a special group in a deferred payment by tax payments over the years. One of the advantages of that, first, it would be a regulated government run by the It would be a regulated market run by the federal government. Patients wouldn't be paying anything. We'd be allocating kidneys the way we do now. And the donors could be carefully screened. And they would be getting a deferred payment, so they wouldn't be desperate. They wouldn't have just had an emergency. We could talk about whether we should be ruling out people who have just had an emergency, but one thing you worry about is that people shouldn't be under undue inducement to do something. And one of the things that I think that we could put into, if this law were passed, we could say in order to get your annual tax deduction, you have to come in for follow-up care. One of the things we worry about is the health of the donors. And because donors are by and large healthy, they don't always come in for follow-up care, so we don't have great statistics on how they're doing. But this would help us do it. But what are the alternatives? Well, there are lots of alternatives, but one of them is black markets run by criminals. Okay, so here's a still that I took from a video of an operation going on somewhere in South Asia. And it's not in a sterile environment. I blurred the pictures. I showed this at a big international transplant conference, and I blurred the pictures so that no one would recognize the surgeons. But I wanted it to be clear they're not wearing masks, and they're not wearing gowns. They're not in a hospital, right? They're operating in a place where it's illegal to buy a kidney, but the kidney is bought. And this is the transplant, but the nephrectomy was surely carried out under no better conditions. So one of the things about banning things is you don't always make them go away. Sometimes you just drive them underground. And these black markets are something we would really like to go away. So in conclusion, I'm going to suggest that we should beware of strong conclusions based on weak evidence. And especially when lives are at stake, as they are for the 135,000 people a year who get kidney failure, we should look for the best evidence we can to decide what to do. And where we need more evidence, we should experiment. Thank you.
All right, thank you for being here, and I'm extremely happy to be part of this conversation. I'm a great fan of Al's work, especially his work on kidney exchanges. I appreciate his perspective on the need to increase the number of available kidneys for transplantation, and I share his humanity on not wanting to overlook the interests of the ill. Nevertheless, I'm a bit less enthusiastic than he is about paying people for their kidneys. And so I want to try to explain why. And when I say I'm less enthusiastic, I'm not strongly opposed in the sense that I would draw a line in the sand here, but I'm a worrier, and I have worries, and I'm going to try to raise some of those worries with you, and they actually relate to something Al mentioned in passing, which is, a kind of slippery slope concern. So, but I want to step back from kidneys for 1 second and just reflect on market exchange. So I'm very interested in the idea of market exchange, and also very taken with an early idea in political economy, kind of got lost for a while, it's come back, which is that markets are very heterogeneous and they act differently. And so an apple market is quite different than a human organ market, than a market in healthcare, than a market in slaves, and then a market in blood diamonds. So they're very different kinds of markets with very different features. And some markets are pretty harmless, and some markets raise moral concerns. And the clicker is here, so I'm just going to quickly, but now I have to think. No? Did I go the wrong way? Yes. Okay. So I think there are 4 kinds of concerns that we should have about markets. So in the classic market, buyer and seller come together, exchange benefits both. Like, what could be wrong with that? I think the libertarian philosopher Robert Nozick said we shouldn't forbid capitalist acts between consenting adults. So what's wrong with a weak market? Well, sometimes in a market, people are transacting about things they don't know about the results of. They're not instantaneous, like my buying the market. I might be buying something that's only delivered a long time in the future. So when people were upset on the real estate market about various kinds of loans, that people didn't really understand the full terms of what they were buying, that's what I call weak agency. Weak agency means you don't have full information, like you do in a perfect market. Sometimes you don't have full agency because you're not transacting yourself, but somebody's transacting for you on the market, like a dictator selling resources on the world market, but saddling his population with debt, or a parent transacting for their child's labor. Let's see. So weak agency is a background condition of a market. A second background condition we might worry about is vulnerability and inequality. Sometimes we worry about markets because we think there's something in the background circumstances of the transacting parties that's worrying. Now, as Al said, banning the market might not help with that. It might make it worse, right? It might be the people who are vulnerable or even more vulnerable in a black market than they would be in a regular market. But somehow markets can inherit some of these background conditions, and so we're more troubled by, markets with price gouging in a famine. Sometimes we're worried about the consequences of a market. So when people have weak information, a market can be harmful, have a harmful consequence. You didn't know what you were buying, right? You didn't know what the terms of that loan were, and you didn't know you would be saddled with this debt. You're buying something that will turn out to be harmful to you. And sometimes harms can be of social in character. So you might think about, we don't allow people to sell votes, even though you have a vote and it's yours and you can do it for free, but you can't put it out on the market because we think that a democratic society would be harmed by having a market in votes. And I have a little chart that looks at markets that some people think are problematic or may think are problematic, and it tries to analyze these in terms of these 4 parameters: weak agency, vulnerability, background conditions, and then consequences. Now again, this doesn't tell you, this kind of analysis, what you should do, because what you should do with a problematic market depends on what's possible. And sometimes what's possible is you could increase agency by, for example, giving people more information. Or you can deal with inequality by doing tax and transfer to change the background circumstances. Sometimes, though, it's really hard to shut down both the problems in the background or the problems in the consequences. So what does this have to do with my worries about kidneys? Okay. So you can think about different options for kidneys, for the distribution of kidneys. One is you could just sell them to the highest bidder, right? Just have an open market. Well, there are a lot of problems with an open market. I think there's always a bit of weak agency. We don't fully know what will happen by giving up a kidney because I can't predict whether I'll need one in 10 years or not. Probably won't, but some information I'm lacking. You might worry there about vulnerability, right? Poor people selling to rich people getting the kidneys, the kidneys not going to the poor, right? And then you might worry about harms to the individual and harms to the society. I don't think most people are in favor of an open market for kidneys. I haven't heard anybody advocating that, but probably, actually, maybe some of you in the audience will, and that's fine. There is a libertarian position that could just say it's mine and I should be able to do with it whatever I want and give it to the highest bidder. Lots of people are more favorable to the idea of a monopsony, so a market where there are many sellers but one buyer. The government buys the kidneys and then distributes them on the basis of need, not on the basis of ability to pay. People find that, at least on the inequality front, and on the less worrying, that's a mistake in the X, should not be there. Deferred payment was one of the options Al mentioned. That's, you could give people a benefit. The benefit could be paid out over time. You could use a kind of matching market, as Al has designed, with kidney exchange, and then you can have altruistic donation. And you can see, in my view, these are not that different. But I do want to say there's some difference that makes me nervous about the deferred payment model. So let me just quickly say why I'm worried about that. So markets have lots of effects. They can sometimes affect third parties who are not transactors in the market. And one way they do that is by what economists call pecuniary effects. They can affect the prices of other goods. So take child labor, for example. Child labor not only has effects on the children who go to work, but in a society with widespread child labor, adult labor prices are usually driven down. And so families who don't want to send their kids to work have a harder time because adult wages are lower. If you could close off child labor, and move the society to a different equilibrium, a better equilibrium with higher adult wages, that would be better, right, for those families. So one issue is, does having the option of getting payment for a kidney somehow change the prices of other goods? And here's a reason why I worry. If you start to think of an organ as having a monetary value and a form of collateral, then you could imagine if you don't put your organ up, you're in a less good position to get a loan or a benefit or some connected opportunity than you would if the option to treat it that way weren't available at all. So once you say, this is a commodity, this is something that is worth something, and here's what it's worth, you could imagine, and this is my worry, in a society where we tend not to treat the poor very well in many, many ways, you could say, look, you want a college loan? Put up your kidney. And if you don't put up your kidney, you're not going to get as good terms. And just like we might think parents shouldn't pay a price for not wanting to send their kids to work, we might think people shouldn't have to pay a price for not wanting to put up an organ as collateral. Now, I'm sure there are ways to really carefully design the market, and maybe this worry could be met, but it is a worry. Of course, I recognize on the other side are the lives that you could save by allowing, right, this kind of, by increasing the supply. But I do want to put out this, the worry about moving in this direction. Okay, and look forward to the discussion and so Al, I don't know if you want to respond to that worry.
Okay. I'd be glad that we talk about the worries, because I think your sort of spreadsheet there is a great place to begin study of market design. But before we talk about that, let me just say that as I look at it, I think how different it would look if we were talking instead about the weak agency, the vulnerability, the possibility of harm to individuals and social harm. If instead of focusing on the donors, we were focusing on the patients, right? So the patients already have weak agency. They have to do business with giant dialysis companies. They're vulnerable. They're going to die. They're unequal. Having a fatal disease is a big inequality compared to healthy people. And of course, they face individual harm and social harm. Many of them die. This is a big cause of death. So one of the things that economists like to think of are trade-offs. And I think we can address many of your concerns, but I guess I'm inclined to say, even if we couldn't perfectly address them, the benefits of reducing the harms to people who are dying of kidney failure strike me as pretty big.
So I don't disagree with your point that there are benefits to the experiment that you're mentioning. I just wouldn't put the potential harm to the poor. I wouldn't discount it. There are a lot of ways we could save lives. We could take people, this is an old philosophy example, you walk into a doctor's office and, it turns out you're a match for 5 people who are dying upstairs, and all the doctor has to do is distribute your organs and 5 lives are saved. Well, we don't think you should do that. So we draw lines, and one of the things that these proposals do is they weaken a line that we tend to draw around the body and around not treating the body in certain ways. And you'll say, well, what about plasma? I actually think plasma is very different because it's renewable. And the thing about an organ is when you give it up, I guess you can get it transplanted back, but it's basically not renewable. And it's the way you think about things. Making a transaction that's reversible is quite different than making a transaction really where it's not reversible. And so if we could replace kidneys or grow them like we can replace our blood, I think it would be very different.
But we pay firefighters and soldiers and policemen, and they sometimes suffer irreversible harm. They can die in the line of duty. So we allow people to take risks for the common good, and we're prepared to pay them for it.
So we talked, you and I, a little bit about this. Yes, we do. And although there are limits to that, I actually, it's probably surprising in some ways, but I'm a big fan of, something like bringing back a draft as opposed to a volunteer army, precisely because I worry about creating a system where the obligation to defend your country comes to fall on one group of people disproportionately and not everyone. And the minute you do these experiments, you're changing, the thing Titmuss was so, was so uppermost in his mind and maybe exaggerated. And again, I agree with you about the harm to the people who are dying. But the thing he was concerned about was moving from a system where everybody felt some civic obligation to give blood to one where it was only the poor supplying blood, and what that would mean about the society and the relations of people in the society. And I feel a little bit of that about the move from a draft to a volunteer army. So even though I accept that we often pay people to put their lives in danger, I think, when we have alternatives, and I didn't say anything about what are some possible alternatives. I mean, there are other things we could do. So, for example, one thing we could do is simply remove all the obstacles right now to kidney donation. So there are some serious obstacles in the sense that you have to take off work, it takes time, people lose money. You could actually make that at least neutral. So you could remove lots of obstacles. I've often thought we should have a contest between Stanford and Berkeley and see if we can get a competitive spirit about, blood donation, plasma donation, maybe kidney donation. I don't think it would be that successful, but it's worth probably trying. We could do what other countries have done, which is change the default of whether it's an opt-in to be a donator or an opt-out to be a donator. With the idea of trying to set the default as you're a donator. How much that would increase supply, I don't know. I know some of the data suggests not that much. But I still have my worries about the slippery slope.
Well, I share some of your worries about the slippery slope. But I think a better analogy for kidney donors is not soldiers and the obligation to defend your country, but firemen, firefighters. We have volunteer firefighters in the U.S. Many small towns have volunteer firefighters, and they're sufficient for small towns. But for densely populated areas where people's lives will be at risk when there's a fire, we pay and train firemen. We make sure they're prepared. And I think that's not a bad analogy for what we're talking about with donation. About agency, you and I both know kidney donors who've exerted quite a bit of agency. So Debra gave a philosophy class, some of whose students became non-directed kidney donors. When I started looking at kidney transplantation, it was quite common for American hospitals, when you have a potential donor, they assign you a nephrologist and a social worker, and they would look at people and they'd say, you have slightly elevated blood pressure. You're not qualified to give a kidney. And the donors sometimes push back. They say, it might not be good for me to give a kidney, but it wouldn't be good if my spouse died. Who are you to tell me I can't take this minor risk to save my spouse's life? And today, American hospitals respond to that. So there, of course, are and may be donors, both unpaid and if we allow them to be paid, who have weak agency. But also there's this big community of people who have a lot of agency and there's an organization called the National Kidney Donors Organization, and they organize hikes up Mount Kilimanjaro periodically to show that they're still in good shape. So part of it is, people maybe have a right to donate organs, but not everyone is completely motivated by that. So I don't think kidneys would be crowded out. I think we'd get a lot more kidneys if we could compensate donors. And to your point about removing the disincentives, that's had some success. I was for many years on the board of a federally funded organization called NALDAC, the National Living Donor Assistance Center. And over time, we got better and better, more and more permissions to pay for more things. Initially, we could just pay for travel and food, and now they can give lost pay and child care and elder care. But it's means tested. It's only for people in the bottom quintile of the income distribution. And it helps. So I'm all in favor of removing the other obstacles. But for so many things, the way we get, often in the philosophy literature, not in your book, but in the philosophy literature, sometimes people say, you're coerced by money if you would do things for money that you wouldn't do otherwise.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah, no, you never said that. Her book is really good. You should read it all. But of course, you and I would teach fewer classes if we weren't paid for teaching classes, right? It's good to be able to earn your living and become expert and learn over time and not just do things as a hobby. And you wouldn't want your kidney surgeons to be hobbyists. So we pay lots of people for lots of things, but we don't pay donors for kidneys, and maybe we should. And we could experiment and try to limit the harms. I'm not saying that there would never be any harms, but for instance, the current law says you can't give valuable consideration. So we could say you can't give valuable consideration unless you're the federal government. And that would prevent contracts in which you used your kidney as collateral, for example.
You want to open it up, or?
Let me just ask. I have an observation which I'm not sure goes anywhere, and then a question. So the observation is simply that there's a difference between taking a risk and a certainty of harm, even though risks add up to a near certainty. So there's a difference between firefighters or soldiers who take a risk of death and sending somebody to their certain death. So I'm not sure how that fits in, except that the discussion of risk and certainty, an economist probably can think of it all in terms of expected value, but subjectively we don't think about that. But the question is, suppose that we develop the technology for transplanting other human parts. People have 2 eyes. You would lose stereoscopic vision, but you still could do pretty well with 2 eyes. People have several limbs. Is there any reason to, assuming that the transplantation was possible, any reason not to extend markets to those?
Well, so I sometimes ask a question like that when I speak to transplant audiences and also economics audiences. And the way I do it is I say, hold up your hand. Let me do it here. Hold up your hand if you think that we should reasonably experiment on a market for compensated kidneys. Now keep your hand up and look around, and you see not everyone has their hand up, but a lot of people do. Now, keep your hand up. Unless you, I'm going to ask the question again, except instead of kidneys, let's say hearts, so the donor dies. Right? Sometimes there are some Chicago economists in the back who keep their hand up. But most people take their hand down. So I think that's right. I mean, one of the reasons why kidney donation is plausible is it's not a lethal harm to, on the contrary, it's a pretty safe operation.
But what about an eye? What about a cornea? What about
So I am not personally proposing.
a limb?
Well, so corneas, deceased donors of corneas, in many American states, the coroner does not have to ask for the cornea. He can just take it, because you can have an open eye wake and not be aware that the corneas are missing. So in many states, we've legislated that corneas can be taken from dead people without the permission of the family. So that's also something we could talk about. But the point is, it does really little harm to the dead person.
Right, but a living person.
No, so I agree. So I am not proposing that we take eyes, even for motivated people. And incidentally, when you ask the question about hearts, it's not that no one would be interested. People commit suicide to do insurance fraud to take care of their families with the payments, so they're willing to die. I think one of the reasons why it's so repugnant to think about selling hearts is if someone comes to you and says, you know, I'm ready to die, but I'd like to give my heart. We feel that maybe you have some obligation of talking them out of committing suicide. You know, you shouldn't be saying, here, I've got some forms you have to fill out.
But the eye example is actually more like the kidney example, because you have 2 eyes. You can be okay with, you know, still get your way around with 1 eye.
So I can imagine situations where I wouldn't forbid it.
Okay.
You know,
So this is the slippery slope.
it's a slippery slope, but you know, but if lots of people were suffering blindness of a sort that could be cured with eye transplant, and you know, and you wanted to give an eye to your spouse, that might be an admirable thing. You know, I mean, maybe we shouldn't allow you, but we should admire you for the intention. And if we should admire you for the intention, maybe we should allow you to do it. But incidentally, right now, we don't allow unpaid transplantation of eyes from living donors, but we do allow unpaid transplantation of kidneys from living donors. So we already think of kidneys and eyes very differently.
Yeah.
And as you say so eloquently in your book, markets are different from each other. These are not apples.
Why don't we have 2 microphones, 1 on each side, and it's time for you to ask questions or make comments. So line up, and I'll call on people. And we'll go back and forth between the 2 microphones.
Hello, thank you both for speaking today. This is a very educational talk. I was curious, I was doing a little bit of research more on the kidney transplant market, the root of the cause of why we have so much kidney failure in the US. And it seems that 75% of cases are due to high blood pressure and diabetes, which are there's a lot of evidence that shows that these maybe are not like facts of life, but a product of the current economic structure in the United States and fast food and things like that, maybe why it skews toward lower educated, lower income families. And I was curious what ideas you might have about market designs that could attack the root of the cause of kidney failure to begin with.
Okay, so I'm not a physician, I'm an economist, but a cure for diabetes would be great, right? You know, I'm just waiting for the day when we don't have to do transplantation anymore. And there might be a number of avenues that would really reduce the need for transplantation, but they won't happen today. Everyone who needs a kidney today will either have gotten a transplant or have died by the time we figure out ways to not need transplants of human organs. So we have some responsibility to the people who are ill today. I don't know the causes of diabetes epidemic. It is increasing around the world. So there was a time when poor countries had mostly infectious disease deaths, and now they have chronic disease deaths. And that's partly a sign of prosperity and increased longevity. It's not just fast food. It's you have to live long enough to have some of these diseases on a population level. But we can, you know, in the same discussion of what's allowed and what's repugnant, you know, when Michael Bloomberg was mayor of New York, he wanted to put a ban on really large sugary drinks in fast food outlets and was essentially voted down. People didn't think that was a good idea. It seemed to them paternalistic. And paternalistic is a word that when we talk about governments, we often use in a negative way. But of course, when we talk about children, if you're not paternalistic, we'll take your children away from you for neglect. I mean, you have to stop them from playing in the highway, things like that. So we could have a whole discussion of whether, and behavioral economists have these discussions, whether those of us former children who have aged out of legal childhood could use some help in dealing with fast food and things like that. And I think that's a valuable discussion to have in a public health sort of way.
Hi. So when you talk about the government being the one buyer for kidneys, would you agree that this should perhaps extend to any type of donation, maybe plasma, the government starts buying plasma exclusively, or even egg donations or sperm donations and controlling the supply for that to make it more equitable and fair across the board?
So I actually think there is a difference when you're thinking about life-saving, urgent needs, and to make sure that those urgent needs are not, that ability to pay doesn't get in the way of satisfying, of dealing with the urgent needs. And people shouldn't be able to jump a queue for an urgent need just because they have more money. I think there are a lot of aspects of healthcare that fall under that, but not all. And so I don't know if I would, how far I would extend that, but I definitely think, the obvious thing that would happen if you had an open market is first the price would go up, but also that people could jump the queue. And I don't think you want kidneys viewed as just commodities in the sense that I don't want people buying them to destroy them or, buying them because they think they're an art piece. You want them buying to meet an important social need, if you're going to do that. And so that does say you need something like a single buyer who's willing to distribute on the basis of need, not on the basis of ability to pay.
So I agree with Debra that by and large I'm not in favor of forming new monopolies where we don't need them.
Hi, so I've seen in the last week or two that there's been kind of a rise in talk and then in the success of transplants of non-human kidneys, which certainly impacts this debate and kind of exacerbates the worry that y'all were talking about that some kidneys might be higher potential kidneys, like you were talking about with the differences in blood pressure. And so in a world where, say, a human kidney might be more expensive because you compensated some donor and the government bought it versus a pig kidney might be cheaper but potentially less viable, like how should a market in that kind of a world work?
So I would guess that if you had the right kind of market, you wouldn't have a shortage of high-quality kidneys. That's the point of the market, is to make sure, first of all, you'd want, you know, as Debra is pointing out to us, you'd want really good informed consent. You wouldn't want people rushing into this when they couldn't make the rent. And really good informed consent would partly be a function of getting people who are really healthy. So one way to tell, you know, there'd be a lot of design to do, but one way to tell 25 years after we settled on a market for human kidneys whether we were successful or not is whether you found paperback books in airplane bookstores called Kidney Sellers Diet and Exercise Regime. You too can qualify to be a kidney donor. You know, it's hard, but you can do it. It's worth it. When you run for public office, you'll be able to boast about it. And people will vote for you because you saved someone's life when you were young. I mean, so there'd be a lot of ways to tell if we had done it badly, because many of those things wouldn't be happening. And what we should have is a line, instead of a waiting list for kidneys, we should have a waiting list to be a donor, right? That we make it attractive enough. And we can afford to, because as you know, I said on one of my slides, transplantation would save an enormous amount of money. Right now, Medicare spends 7% of its budget on dialysis and a little bit of that on transplantation. Dialysis is very expensive and it's not very good for people. And we can afford, it would save us money to save more lives. But, you know, as for pig kidneys, I personally will be very happy when we no longer have to transplant human kidneys. I don't have the sense that that's going to happen very soon. There are a lot of issues with pig kidneys.
Yeah, although the donor the recipient just went home, right?
Yep. So far, there hasn't been a medical report. There have been mostly news reports. So he had apparently a rejection episode. We'll see what happens. I wish him the best. I am ready. You know, I hope that my very young grandchildren will think of transplantation as some barbarous relic from the past. They'll say, "Tell me again, Grandpa, you used to cut organs out of healthy people and sew them into sick people? Or cut organs out of dead people and sew them into sick people?" I hope that that's a thing long in the past. But I'm not, you know, there are ways in which I'm more optimistic than Debra, but I'm not particularly optimistic on that. You know, it turns out medicine works a lot slower than consumer electronics.
Let me interject a question for both of you, and it goes to the issue of weak agency or informed consent. Regret is a complicated phenomenon, as those of you who do behavioral economics know. But would it be useful to know what percent of people who have kidneys removed for whatever donative purposes, whether they regret having done so later? And do we have any data on that?
I know of some data, but a lot of it is data from places where kidney selling is illegal. So where people do express regret, but partly they didn't get the money they thought they would get out of debt, and they didn't get out of debt. There were not good follow-ups in healthcare, you know, so that they were, you know, badly, weren't taken care of. You may know more about this, Elle, than I do. When Iran first started with legalized, the monopsony of the government buying kidneys, I did see something that said that some people were embarrassed or ashamed. So there's a stigma around it that leads people like, I did it, I had to do it, but I regret doing it.
So it is true that the donors, the seller donors in Iran, like to stay anonymous, so they're not proud of them. You know, they're not glad for it to be known. So that's a sign that that market is not working well. In the U.S., where we have voluntary altruistic donation, again, there's a vigorous organization called the National Kidney Donors Organization, and these are the guys who are lobbying for the experiment I mentioned, for the No More Kidney Deaths Act. But they find it very fulfilling. I mean, and in terms of, so I don't have current figures, they're going down, but the death rate from donors is fewer than 1 in 10,000. So it's much safer than pregnancy.
Over here.
Thank you both so much. Debra, your worries seem to be largely rooted on sort of a concern for the sanctity of the human body, the irreversibility of this transaction, and also about the distributional concerns. At least to me, this seemed to sort of track with sort of traditions of Western liberalism and to some degree Christian moral philosophy. And so my question is, do you think the levels of visceral noxiousness would vary in places where of different belief systems, or do you think those are rooted in sort of universal human values? Because hopefully, to most of us, none of us should like sort of pain and suffering.
So a lot of my worries are, consequentialist worries or the weak agency worry, but the slippery slope worry probably is a worry about, that's a liberal worry about the dangers of the collective society thinking of your body as a set of assets that could be used by society in various ways. And that's the idea of there's a prophylactic line. Now, I think lots of societies draw that kind of line around the body. I don't think it's only a Western idea, but it may be more, kind of a liberal idea because it's very tied to the sanctity of the individual. Again, I have Al in my head saying, but what about the sanctity of the individual who's dying? And what about their body? And so drawing the line around the body in the way I'm proposing has consequences for somebody else's body. And I see that. I just worry about weakening that boundary and in such a way that people then feel pressure. The way you feel pressure when you have an option, and if you close off the option, you're not subject to that kind of pressure anymore. Like, I don't have to think about it. I mean, it's the reason we think closing off some options can sometimes make everybody better off. In this case, it doesn't make everybody better off because the person who's dying and needs an organ is not made better off, but it might be other people are made worse off by giving them the option, and that is a worry.
On the other hand, you can also be coerced without money. If you go home for Thanksgiving and your sister needs a kidney and your mom thinks you should give your sister a kidney, you may be coerced. And it might be better if you could buy her a kidney.
True.
So, as you mentioned, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that you might die donating a kidney, which in particular is non-zero. And I assume that if this chance was instead 1 in 2, your answer might be different. So this implies that there's a threshold at which your answer changes. How might you determine that threshold? How do you think about it? And how does that inform your approach to other markets like the eye market or even the heart market, where there's a 1 in 1 chance that you would die?
Well, let's put it this way. I admire people who give kidneys to strangers. They're very efficient in the way we organize kidney exchange in the United States. So a person who wants to give a kidney to someone and doesn't have a particular person in mind can facilitate a lot of transplants. We organize them in chains. But I don't condemn anyone who declines to do that. I'm not saying to you, you should give your kidney to someone. So there are lots of personal decisions here. Giving a kidney to your spouse seems to me a much easier decision than giving a kidney to a stranger. But again, I don't condemn anyone who doesn't give a kidney. I don't think this is something you must do. On the other hand, so I think there's a lot to be said for personal decisions, right? Thinking about the risk to you, to the person you love, to the general population. And I'm not trying to decide for you whether you should give a kidney. Now, we also do living liver donation, which is more dangerous. Okay, so we do a lot less of it because it's more dangerous, also because we can't keep liver patients alive as long. There's no liver dialysis. But people give livers. And speaking of agency, there are people who, having given a kidney and recovered, which they do pretty promptly, go on to give a lobe of their liver. And you give a lobe of your liver and it regenerates. So we have 2 or 3 dozen people a year in the United States who are giving a second organ as live donors. So I don't think it's my decision when someone should give an organ, by answering your question.
But I want to ask that question again. You're advocating an experiment that you wouldn't advocate in the heart case. So, and then the question is, okay, is there a threshold under which you would no longer advocate for an experiment? You know, when they're...
Yeah, I'm not advocating for a heart. I mean, so, 100% of death, I don't. Now, we have medical aid in dying in California, and there's medical aid in dying in some European places, and there are some experiments. I mean, one thing is people who have medical aid in dying sometimes want to give an organ, right? They're dying, they're ready to die, but they would like to save a life as well. And in some European countries, that's now been allowed, and I think it has happened once or twice in Canada. So there are ways to experiment with hearts too, but I wouldn't want to experiment with hearts for someone who wasn't dying.
Can I ask you one thing? It's not unconnected to this, which is just about the enforcement mechanism. So you said, I wouldn't, these are individual decisions, but assume, okay, I've gotten a benefit from the government, a deferred tax break, but I haven't given up my kidney yet. Should the government be able to come and take my kidney if
I'm not in favor of the government coming to take your kidney.
Okay, even though I signed an agreement?
That's a contract. In U.S. law, we mostly do liquidated damages. We don't do enforcement of contracts.
That's
We
true.
say, give the money back.
All right, so that would be your...
That's how we do it.
Thank you.
Great.
Hi, thank you so much. My question has both an economic component and also maybe a philosophical component. Throughout the discussion today, I can't help but hear my mother's voice in my head from a kitchen table discussion when I was a teenager.
I'm trying to sound like your mother.
Yeah. Then it's going to get really loud in here if I try to do that. So I, being a cockeyed idealist, I floated this idea at the family dinner table about maybe this is something I should do. And I'll never forget, my mother snapped at me and said, absolutely not. You have siblings. You have us, your parents. You have your future children. How dare you take that away from them? And so my question then becomes, should we be concerned about the economic and philosophical impact of that? I understand like 2% of donated kidneys are non-designated. The vast majority of living donation, the vast majority are obviously through these strong ties, most likely family. So from an economic standpoint, do you worry about an exacerbation effect, or has this been incorporated in your models, of where the poorer people who are much more likely to see the benefit of this government compensation for their kidney, you're basically cannibalizing available familial supply of kidneys for the poor in favor of increasing the supply of available viable kidneys for the rich. Is that cross-subsidization something you've seen in the economics? And then the last thing I would ask is then philosophically, obviously the question about different worldviews. In liberal democracy, I believe that we typically associate more the choice and freedom to really invest in strong ties versus in another system, say a more authoritarian system, where the sort of obligation of your weak ties to society might be more in line with trying to trying to create a moral imperative for people to donate in a non-designated way. So I guess my philosophical question is, should we be worried that opening this box could have unintended consequences to some of the makeup of our social order today?
So, first of all, let's talk about scarcity. I think if we had a successful market for kidneys, there'd be no shortage. So you wouldn't have to worry about being able to get a kidney for a member of your family, because there would be kidneys for people who needed them. Now, as it happens, on this question of what your mom said to you, I once had a conversation with a non-directed donor, and I said to him, many people think about being a non-directed donor but are deterred because thinking that someone in their family might need it. And what he said to me is, he said, I'm a policeman. If someone in my family needed a donor, one of my colleagues would step up. So there's a question of social cohesion, and we might be, rather than tearing down social cohesion, we might be bringing it up. In other words, if we were accustomed to giving kidneys to save lives, then you wouldn't have to only give a kidney to your kid when your kid needed one. You would have already given a kidney to someone else would give a kidney to your kid. But all the more so if we're selling them.
So I want to, just one thing, the non-directed donation, I mean, it's much easier if you have a really good match with a relative than even, you know, what you can do with all the drugs. So there is a cost if I don't have an extra organ to give, let's say, to my son. It's, right?
No, I think this is mistaken. So
Okay.
your son and you are not necessarily a good match.
Well,
When we do non-directed donation, we get pretty much
Yeah,
perfect
pretty much
matches.
perfect matches,
So
okay.
once you have a lot of
Alright.
kidneys, you get good matches. Family
Okay.
matches are
So then
just
that,
what they
that-
are.
Yeah, so then that object, but this is a case of weak agency, you know, since you don't know what the future is going to hold. And I remember one of my students who did give up his kidney in a non-directed way, his parents were very angry at me, even though I didn't cause him to
But
do
he's now one
this.
of the founders of
He's now
GiveWell.
one of the founders of GiveWell. But anyway, and they said to me, you know, his brother might need his kidney, and he'll have children. And I said to him, like, well, what do you think about that? And he said, I don't want to be in the position where I have that choice. I want to take that choice away from myself right now because I want to give a non-directed, it's more important to me to do a non-directed donation than a donation to my family.
But if someone in your family needs blood plasma, there's no shortage, right? So you don't have to preserve your blood plasma aside from the fact that it's renewable. In other words, we have enough. You know, Adam Smith has a famous quote that says, it's not through the generosity of the butcher and the baker that you get your food, right? We may have crowded out all the altruistic donation of food, but there's plenty of food. And so Gary Becker, a Chicago economist, used to say, you know, there's no shortage of kidneys, everybody has two. And what we're talking about is making sure that there's no shortage of kidneys so that these difficult choices aren't the ones that face us.
Thanks.
The last question of the day.
So you discussed the ethics and implications of a live kidney market, but what are your thoughts on financial incentives for deceased donations? For example, a tax credit for signing up to be an organ donor in the case of a fatal accident.
So I think, though, that it makes me worry less than doing it to people who are alive now, because the connections to other assets is weaker. I actually think something like a futures market, you know, where you pay for the kidney on death, you know, or give a benefit for the kidney on death, actually does seem like a compromise position.
I'd be happy to see families compensated, families that consent to having a deceased donor. Doing the futures market is hard because it's actually hard to die in a way that makes your organs donatable. Mostly dying is very bad for your organs. But so just a tiny percentage, you know, less than 2% of people who have deaths, you know, can lead to organ donation. But I'd be happy. In China, the Red Cross pays funeral expenses and some related things for families of donors. And some of the people who are opposed to payment oppose that. You know, there was a recent article by Frank Delmonico and Nancy Asher saying, you know, what a terrible thing they're doing in China to compensate families of deceased donors. But, you know, I'm just an economist, but like Debra, I think that we probably do less harm to deceased people when we take their organs, and I'd be prepared to encourage that, to incentivize that.
Okay,
So
thank
we
you.
actually have another last speaker.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about, maybe elaborate a little bit more on the black market for kidneys. Because the reality is that you're discussing a little bit ideal, right? On one hand, it's like, well, reinforcing and donating altruistically, and that's one side. On the other side, we have market, and everyone gets paid, and everything is done cleanly and safely. But the reality is that there is black market, and there is a price for kidneys, and you can be coerced. So for you, Professor, the question is, currently people can be coerced into donating kidney and get a price so they could save family or spend for whatever they want, Christmas, gifts, or whatever. And then for you, Professor Roth, the question is, if we do implement the payment for kidneys, does black market go away? Because if you get the price wrong, we know as economists that black market still emerges. So, black market, elaborate on that.
Yeah, important. So we're talking about an idealized world here. I mean, we're mostly thinking about the United States. We're not thinking about, most of the world, there are black markets, particularly in some of the global south. India is, very famous for having what's sometimes called the kidney belt, where people go and get kidneys. I had a student who went on and now is an econ professor at Berkeley and wrote his undergraduate thesis here on kidney markets in India, and he went down and interviewed people. He found the people who had sold their kidneys didn't know how many kidneys they had. It was mostly women who were selling their kidneys, lots of coercion and lots of pressure for the women to be the sellers. And then, on the regret part, people didn't actually get anything near what they were promised, and so whatever benefit they thought they would see, they didn't see. So black markets are terrible. Can you close down? So there are really two issues. There's, can you close down a black market? If you can't close it down, that's a problem. Sometimes we have been successful in closing down black markets. Maybe child labor isn't fully eradicated in the US, but it's largely eradicated inside the US. We were pretty successful in closing that black market down, or that practice down, but other countries haven't been able to do that. So we don't always know if we ban a practice like paying for kidneys, if we will cause a black market, and to what extent the global black market is connected to the bans in the developed countries that most of the world that bans it. So I actually worry a lot about the black market. Part of my worry about, we don't treat the poor so well, and there are slippery slopes here and all kinds of things, is look how we treat people around the world. It's not great. And so I worry about, can we design things in such a way that they don't connect or reproduce these things or flow into them?
So I agree about black markets. If you have, having medical care being delivered by criminals is not ideal. I have a paper that came out recently with a big group of co-authors, there are 4 of us, who don't all agree about the market in Iran, but we were asked to write about it. And what we wrote was, we can disagree about whether it's a good thing to have this market in Iran, but in Iran, the surgeries are all conducted in real hospitals by real surgeons, and there's aftercare. So it's high-quality medical care, as opposed to the picture I showed you of low-quality care. And some of the medical administrators around the world think of black markets as just being a natural consequence of lots of transplants. So they don't want so many transplants because they don't want black markets. But I think that's just a mistake in the economics, right? The reason we have black markets is there aren't enough safe, legal, ethical ways to get kidneys. And if there were, no one would go to have their transplant in a villa where they're not using antiseptic procedures. We have examples in the U.S. In the late 1920s, early 1930s, we had prohibition. We banned markets in alcohol. And now we have, we re-amended the Constitution to allow markets in alcohol because we didn't like the organized crime that developed around alcohol, and it didn't make alcohol go away. And of course, the legal market doesn't solve all the problems. Alcoholism is still a bad thing. But one thing you can't do anymore is buy moonshine whiskey from gangsters. They've been put out of the business. When you go to these expensive stores on El Camino, you can buy, Scotch whiskey that's been aged in oak barrels. It's a very different market. Maybe we'd be better off without alcohol, but it turns out that wasn't available to us. We tried hard, and it didn't go away. We caused black markets instead. So that's one of the things we have to think about is, how do we fight black markets? And I think one way we fight them is by competing, by creating legal, ethical markets.
So before we close the class and thank our discussants, we want to do two things. One is we want to do the poll again. We'll put up the QR code for the poll.
Oops. 3, 2, 1.
So what was the difference before? What was? All right, so
And for those of you who don't have a little pink heart on your California driver's license, there's still plenty of time to register to be a deceased donor if the occasion should arise.
it doesn't increase the likelihood of being deceased, I should hasten to say. Riding a motorcycle or some of the scooters on campus may, however.
Electric skateboards.
Right. So the other and I mentioned at the beginning that a goal of this class, as important as elucidating some current issues, is to model good discourse. And let me just say 2 quick comments about discourse today. Notice the role that evidence played in the discussion for both Debra and Al. Not evidence the way lawyers sometimes do, pulling out something on your side, but actually looking for facts that are well documented. And then notice also how well they listened to each other. That the dialogue was one is, here's what you say, I agree with some of it and not all of it, and probing for similarities as well as differences. If we could have dialogue on more heated subjects like this, we'd all be in much better shape. Thanks, both of you, for your participation.